Okay, it's 7 o'clock and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight, so I'm not going to waste any time before we get started. Thanks everybody for joining us on tonight's Farminar. I'm Steve Carlson. I'm a staff member at Practical Farmers of Iowa, and I'll be kind of the MC for tonight a little bit. And tonight's topic, as you know, is on the Conservation Stewardship Program. We've been hearing a lot about the plans to overhaul this program for a couple years now, and we're finally learning about what those changes are, and so we've got Iowa's CSP coordinator Dave Brommel to talk about that with us tonight. And then after Dave speaks, then we've got Larrette Kolbe, who is a district conservationist up in Buena Vista and Pocahontas counties, and she's actually joined by a local farmer and the Soil Water Conservation District Commissioner Jim Hinkeldey. And they're going to walk through the sign-up process for CSP with us, kind of give an idea of what that process is like. But before I turn it over to Dave here, I'm going to speak a little bit about PFI and our Farminar series real quick. So this is our fall Farminar series. We've got four more topics yet for this fall, and then we'll take a couple weeks off and start up in January again for about 12 more weeks. So look near the end of the year for an announcement on those other 12 to 14 topics that we've got planned for January through March. So you can see the next ones coming up. Actually, Jack Boyer's here tonight. He'll be speaking for us on the cover crop research trials he's been doing, and that's going to be December 13th. So these are always free, always 7 o'clock on Tuesday nights. So tune in to join us for one of these topics coming up. And we do record these and we put them on our website in the Farminar archives, so you can find that at practicalfarmers.org if you miss one and you want to see what you missed out on. So Practical Farmers of Iowa started back in 1985 as a nonprofit made up of farmers who at that time were interested in bringing back diversity and reducing costly inputs, which was, during the years of the farm crisis, and our farmers are still interested in those kinds of things. But today we're made up of farmers from all enterprises and all sizes, and from all over the state and beyond Iowa as well. And we've also got a lot of friends of farmers in our organization who like to support our mission too. So we're a real diverse farmer-led organization. And our mission at PFI is to strengthen farms and communities through farmer-led investigation and information sharing. And this mission allows us to help farmers practice an agriculture that benefits both the land and the people. Our values at PFI are welcoming everyone, creativity, collaboration, and community, viable farms now and for future generations, and stewardship and ecology. So I encourage you to join us. We are a member-based organization, and members really guide our programming, and as a member, you can tap into our network of farmers and friends of farmers and get on our email discussion list to talk about topics in your enterprises with other farmers. You get quarterly newsletters and discounts to our events and the opportunity to participate in research projects and all of our programming. So you can learn more about what the benefits are for being a member of PFI on our website again. So I encourage you to check that out. We are kind of wrapping up our field day season. Usually when we start our Farminars, this is our way of continuing farmer-to-farmer education once our field day season is over. But if you check our event calendar, you'll still find some other things coming up. We have some cover crop field days yet this November and into December. There's a lot of partner events on there as well. So still some other learning opportunities. And then in January in Ames, January 20th through 21st is our annual conference. And we just released our booklet listing the more than 50 sessions that we've got planned for this conference. Lots of workshops and learning opportunities there on a wide range of topics for farmers of all skill levels. So definitely look up some more information about our conference. Again, that's on our website, and we can mail you the booklet if you'd like. So just shoot me an email or look that up on the site. So real quick, some housekeeping rules. We do have the chat box there that we encourage you to ask questions in. So if you've got questions for Larrette or Dave, feel free to type them into the chat box. If they see your question and it makes sense to answer it at that time, they can go ahead and answer it. If they don't get to it, then I'll make sure that we circle back, because we're going to try and get all this content in to this first hour, and then at 8 o'clock 8 o'clock-ish, we'll try and break for going through the questions that were missed in the chat box. Also, like you noticed, if you want to share with us from where you're from, that's kind of neat. I'm in Ames. I know Dave is down in Des Moines. Larrette and Jim are up in Storm Lake. So all of us in Iowa. If you want to stay in touch with our Farminar series, supply us with your email address, and I'll put you on our email list that we send out just once a week during the Farminar season. And some of you noticed there down in the bottom left corner of the screen is a little poll, and we just try to get kind of a head count about how many people are tuning in from their computers. So if there's a couple of you watching from one machine, then please check that box. We can kind of see how many people are showing up tonight. Then finally, the last thing I guess is that when we're near the end of the Farminar, I'm going to post a link on the screen here that it will just be a very short survey for you to help provide some feedback for the Farminar. So please take a quick minute after the presentation to give us some feedback about this Farminar. So thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to pull up Dave's presentation here, and once that's up, Dave's going to take it away and talk about CSP, changes that are being made to CSP, and then after that, we'll give it over to Larrette.
Okay, I see the presentation up on my screen. This is Dave Brommel, as Steve had said, and I'm here in Des Moines, the CSP coordinator for NRCS for Iowa, and I'll talk a little bit about the CSP program. I'm going to start off, and the screen here shows I'm going to talk a little bit about the history, just kind of recent history, what's been going on with CSP. I'll discuss what the purpose of CSP is, and then I'll talk about some of our key concepts and changes. As Steve mentioned, we've got a major overhaul in the CSP program that's happening for the next year, and so it's going to mean things look a lot different. But I don't think it's going to be more difficult. In fact, I think it's going to be a lot easier to understand. So that'll be some good things to the changes anyway. Just we're going to have to get used to change, of course. I'll start off just talking a little about CSP. With the passing of the 2014 Farm Bill, CSP was authorized for 10 million acres per year for each fiscal year throughout the life of that Farm Bill. That's a little bit down from the prior Farm Bill from 2008 Farm Bill, which had 12.7 million acres per year. And we haven't got the full 10 million acres every year. That's authorized up to 10 million acres. I think a couple of years ago, we received about 7.8 million acres nationally. And so, then last year it was back up a little bit higher again. This year, our numbers within the state are down a little bit, and I'll show you on the next screen what's happened in Iowa over the last 2 years and what our plant expectations are for the next year. In 2015, we had 135,000 acres, just a little bit over, of CSP in the state of Iowa. In 2016, our numbers jumped up to around 202,000 acres, and this is the amount of acres that we were allocated, and we obligated our full allocation both of those years. So if we have not have enough or don't have enough applications to use all of those acres, of course we would give them back. Some other state would use them, and both those years we funded less than half of the applications. So we really did just get the best applications funded based on the number of acres we have. If we received, let's say, double those acres, of course, we would have funded some applications that maybe weren't quite as good, but we did have plenty of applications, which is a good thing. Our 2017 allocation, what we've been told is we're going to receive 183,000, just a little bit over that acres, which is, you can see, is a part way in between the last 2 years. If you look at our existing contracts in Iowa, we have almost 1.6 million acres of existing contracts. Each of these contracts are written to last up to 5 years, and they have the option to renew them for additional 5 years. So some of those contracts that were signed back in 2010, for example, have been renewed, and so those don't count against the 10 million acres that we get each year. So some of these acres that we received, at the very beginning of the stewardship program in the Farm Bill are ongoing for up to 10 years, and that's why you can see that we have existing contracts at almost 1.6 million acres. We'll talk a little bit about the purpose of CSP and where it's applicable at. Through CSP, NRCS provides financial and technical assistance to eligible producers. I don't think I have this on any of the slides, but the amount of funding provided for CSP is $18 per acre nationally, and $16 per acre of that goes towards financial assistance right into contracts. The other $2 per acre goes for technical assistance, and so you can see the majority of that does go right directly into the contracts. Now, as I said, $16 per acre, that's an average over the nation. There's higher payment rates on cropland, obviously, as compared to rangeland or pasture land. So, you might be somewhat familiar and say, well, we received a lot higher than $16 per acre, and that's true. We probably would have received more than $16 per acre in a lot of our contracts in the past because the average is $16 per acre over the country. It is applicable to any of the 50 states in the Caribbean area and also to the Pacific Islands. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just read this one. It's quite lengthy, but basically the purpose of CSP is to encourage producers to address priority resource concerns and improve their conservation performance by installing and adopting additional conservation activities and improving and maintaining and managing existing conservation activities on eligible land. Basically, what that's really saying is that what we're looking to do is we want to maintain the current stewardship that we have, plus we need to do something extra to receive our CSP payments. So we got to take it to a higher level. So typically we're looking for the people that have really been doing the most to improve their stewardship in the past, and then trying to take them up to a higher level with the CSP program. Okay, there is some differences obviously between CSP and EQIP. I just want to cover a little bit about what those differences are, because the EQIP is a program that everybody's familiar with. The EQIP stands for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. It's a program that typically in the past has provided assistance to implement practices to treat existing resource concerns. So a lot of the practices you've seen with the terraces or grass waterways or cover crop seedings, livestock waste storage facilities, a lot of those practices have been put in place using EQIP financial assistance. What CSP does is it encourages the producers to address the resource concerns in a comprehensive manner by improving, maintaining, and managing those existing activities while also installing and adopting additional conservation activities. One of the things that is not eligible for CSP is that we're not allowed to pay for any livestock waste storage or transfer of livestock waste. So you won't see any enhancements or any practices associated with livestock waste in the CSP program. And I know a lot of our EQIP dollars do go that direction. CSP has statutory limitations. First of all, it's only eligible on private land. So if you happen to be farming some land that is cash rented on some state-owned land or some county-owned land or even federal-owned land, those lands are not eligible for the CSP program. It has to be privately owned. As I mentioned before, they're 5-year contracts with an option for the producer to renew for one additional 5-year period. If you've renewed that one additional time, the current Farm Bill is written that if it comes up at the end of that 10th year after you've renewed it once, you would not have the option to renew it again. You would still have the option, though, to go ahead and enter into another new contract. You would sign up to start all over again. So we don't know in the new Farm Bill if that might change, but at this point in time, you only can renew one time. We do have payment limitations. We're not allowed to receive more than $200,000 for a contract during the current Farm Bill, which runs from 2014 to 2018. The contracts can't go over that. And we also have persons or legal entities that may not receive more than $200,000 over the life of the contract. And they're also set up that would be $40,000 per year in a contract that's written for 5 years. That would get to your $200,000. CSP does have a continuous sign up, so you can walk in the door at the NRCS office, sign up at any time. We do have ranking periods where we have a cutoff date for signing up. As you can see at the bottom of this one, for 2017, our cutoff date for applications to batch those applications and rank them will be February 3rd of 2017. So if you're interested, you want to make sure you get in by February 3rd for the general sign up. We have not had an announced date for renewal applications. So if you have a 2013 contract that is going to be completed at the end of the next year, there will be a date where those people that are going to have those contracts expiring can sign up. That's going to be at a later date. It won't be by February 3rd. I'm guessing sometime late March, maybe around April timeframe will be the cutoff date for signing those. We'll send out notifications to those people that do have expiring contracts to let them know, though, what times those are. Okay. The stewardship contract requires a participant, as I said before, to maintain the existing activities and install the new activities as scheduled in the plan. When they receive their payment, we're receiving the payment after October 1st for the contract activities that were carried out in the previous year. So, for example, the payments that we'd be making right now are for the things that were done in 2016. And the participant does have the option, if they don't want to receive the money in this calendar year, they can say, can I receive that payment after the first of the year? And that's always fine to do. We have, I'd say, probably not quite half of them would take the payment now in the next year, but we do have a pretty good share that do. To be an eligible applicant, you must be the operator of the farm as assigned by FSA over at the Farm Services Agency. So if you don't have records at FSA now, one of the first things you need to do is go over and get records established at FSA, and you'll have to be listed as operator. If you're a cash rent landowner, you're not eligible to apply for CSP. It has to be the operator. Now, if you're in a situation where it's on a 50-50 basis, then we have options for the owner can be on the contract along with the operator in that case. As long as they're involved in the day-to-day management and have risk in the operation. So typically this is a program where you would see the operator only on most contracts. Sometimes we have situations where you might have more than one operator. In that case, we have to be careful to make sure that we don't have, if we set payment shares, you can't go to payment shares higher than what your share is in the operation. So we have to be careful about not giving a higher payment share to somebody that's not listed as the operator if they're going to go on the contract with them. That can get a little bit confusing, I know. They do have to have their establishing up their records with FSA prior to the close of the evaluation period. And what that means is that we do have a February 3rd cutoff date for applications, but this is saying that we actually have a little bit time after that to get those records at FSA up to date, because our ranking period will be about a month and a half after that to get the applications ranked. But it's always best if you can get that done right away prior to the end of that cutoff date. Okay, to be eligible for stewardship, there's a threshold we must meet. First of all, an application must meet 2 resource concerns for each land use and land management system at the time of application. And what I mean by each land use, you may have potentially up to 5 land uses in Iowa. You might have cropland, obviously, which would be cropland with an annual mixed rotations in there. You might have cropland that's a perennial rotation. Typically, that might be for orchards and vineyards. Potentially, you could have some continuous hay that's never torn up that would fit into that perennial rotation. You could also, of course, have pasture as a land use. And now we have something new that's called associated ag land. This would be for our odd areas, a lot of little corners or in areas of the field that you just don't really get to, that you leave out. If you had irrigation, those center pivot corners would fit into that. A lot of our ditches that are, of course, along streams in those areas would be considered associated ag land. Those areas that you just can't farm, and that is a separate land use, and we're actually receiving payments on that in the new program. So that's one of the new changes, that we're going to receive payment on those associated ag land. Of course, we have to have resource concerns treated on that for it to be eligible for in the first place. And then the fifth one would be farmsteads. In the past, the farmstead land was not eligible. That's changed also with the new program. We're also going to have farmstead areas eligible. And the same thing, they'll have to have resource concerns, two resource concerns treated there. And I'll talk in a little bit about what we mean by two resource concerns treated. Once you've reached that eligibility of having two resource concerns treated, you also have to, at a minimum, an applicant must meet or exceed one additional resource concern for each land use by the end of the stewardship contract. So that means if you have met the criteria of having two resource concerns treated, you have to treat a third one on each of the land uses. So if you've got both cropland and pasture and a farmstead, each of them would have to treat an additional resource concern to be eligible. Here is a list of 5 of the resource concerns, and at the top of this, on the table, it shows that these are targeted resource concerns. For eligibility, I said you had to have 2 resource concerns treated. It doesn't matter whether the resource concerns treated are targeted or non-targeted resource concerns for eligibility. Where the targeted versus non-targeted comes into play is in the ranking process. So these 5 resource concerns were recommended by the State Technical Committee to be the targeted resource concerns, and the ones that will rank higher if you have those treated at the time of application, or if you do something to treat any of these by adding enhancements or practices in your contract. So these 5 are soil erosion, soil quality degradation, water quality degradation, fish and wildlife inadequate habitat, and livestock production limitation. And the next slide will show what the 5 non-targeted resource concerns are. And as I said, you're still eligible if your two resource concerns treated are within this group. It just won't rank as high as if they were in the other group. These 5 are excess water and insufficient water, air quality impacts, degraded plant condition, and inefficient energy use. Okay. I'm going to go and now talk about some of the key concepts along with what some of the changes are with the CSP program. I'll just move right on into that. Some of the background on the changes. Beginning back in early of 2015, NRCS took an effort to reinvent the stewardship program. In order, first, they wanted to increase transparency. Some of the things we had in the past, if you look at the contracts, we were paying for existing activity points, or we were paying for new activity points. And if I'm looking at my contract, I'm getting paid for points. It doesn't really tell me what I'm getting paid for. It's hard to really follow that. So I think when you see the new program, that's one of the changes. It's going to make it a lot easier to figure out what's in my contract. What do I have to really do? We're trying to align CSP processes with those of other programs, particularly to be more similar to EQIP, which a lot of people are very familiar with EQIP, so you'll see some similarities between the two programs. Hopefully, we're increasing producer awareness of the impacts of the current and future activities. And I think a lot of that's going to be just in the contract itself and be able to see the things that you are supposed to do in your contract. Trying to connect available enhancements to existing NRCS conservation practice standards. What we're meaning with that, in the past, some of the enhancements that you would be eligible to do were things that might be tied towards nutrient management or for pest management, but the enhancement was just out there standing on its own, and it wasn't really looked upon as this is a nutrient management enhancement. I'll use drift reducing nozzles as an example. That was one of the enhancements. If you change the nozzles on your sprayer to be drift reducing nozzles, that was one of the enhancements you could do in the past. Now that is one of the things that is associated with an enhancement tied towards pest management. So now when you're doing that enhancement, you're doing something that is related to pest management, trying to go to a higher level in your pest management standard. So all the enhancements now, you'll be able to clearly see what practice that enhancement is helping to further that to a higher level. And also it's much easier to see which resource concern that's helping us to treat. And we also are looking to allow some additional flexibilities in scheduling of conservation activities and contract management. And in the past, if you did an enhancement, we said once you started that, you had to complete that enhancement for the rest of the years of the contract at the same location throughout the life of the contract. There's going to be some flexibilities allowing you to schedule some of these enhancements. To do it, you could do it 1 year, and then maybe you don't want to do it in that same place the next year. You want to go to another field the following year. You'll be able to do that. It'll be easier to do that, and we can identify in your contract up front, where you really would like to do those enhancements at, and which years you want to do them. So there'll be some more flexibilities that way. A little bit easier to do modifications to make changes in the contract if you make some changes in your operation too. So some of the improvements include we developed a web-based evaluation tool that's going to help us to evaluate the resource concerns, determine which resource concerns are treated. It's going to be a lot clearer, I think, when you go through that with us on what it is that you need to do if you have a resource concern that's not treated to get it to a standard to move that forward to where it is considered treated. We have additional enhancements. Our enhancement numbers have increased, our practices are increased, and bundles of enhancements, excuse me, have also increased. I'm going to take a second here to take a drink of water before I try to lose my voice. This is my second presentation day, so I've talked a little bit extra. There'll be some flexibility in selection of the conservation activities too. So we'll just go on to the next slide and talk about what some of that meant. First of all, when I said that we've developed a tool, each application must be evaluated to determine if the stewardship threshold requirements are met. So we're using what we're calling the Conservation Activity Evaluation Tool, and we're calling it CATE for short, just because we like to use acronyms for everything, and it's used for that purpose. And so once we've taken it through the Conservation Evaluation Tool, we'll at that point know how many resource concerns have been treated and be able to take it to the next step, which is to rank that application. And ranking that application is going to be done. In the past, it was done through our conservation measurement tool, and we asked a lot of questions. The producer told us a lot of answers, and we plugged those answers in, and it kicked out some points. And you had no idea really what that, how those points were higher or lower for what reason, what you did that made that a higher or lower ranked application. I think it'll be a lot easier with the new process for ranking. We'll take the results out of the eligibility tool, the conservation activity evaluation tool, and put them into what we call the application evaluation and ranking tool. But this is just the same ranking tool that we've used for the EQIP program for several years. And what we're looking at is going to, when we come out of the evaluation tool, we're going to have identified how many resource concerns were treated at the time of application. There will be more points for those that had 3 or 4 resource concerns treated versus somebody that had 2 resource concerns treated. There will be more points for those that decide to apply practices or enhancements to go to a higher level on an additional higher number of resource concerns. So if you treat 3 or 4 more resource concerns by applying new activities, that's going to rank higher than if you only move one activity to being treated. So it's going to be pretty clear. I think you'll be able to see why your application might rank high or might not rank high, because I think these are a lot easier through the ranking process to see those things that you're getting extra points for. As I mentioned, there's more enhancements, more practices, and more bundles. So you have to select an additional conservation activity as part of your CSP application in the contract. But your activities can be the enhancements, which are taken in practice really to a higher level, or it can be a practice that you apply for, or it could be a bundle of enhancements. And when I say bundle of enhancements, we may have a bundle that's geared towards soil quality, and that bundle may include 3 or 4 enhancements that are all related to soil quality, but when you put them all together, we get a little better soil quality versus if you did each one of those individually. So they're offered as a bundle. When we do that, we get a higher payment rate for doing the bundle than we would have got if you did that group of enhancements each individually. It's a 15% higher payment rate because we expect to have a little higher benefit by doing them as a group. Okay. As I mentioned, there's more of each of these enhancements, bundles, and practices. In 2016, we had 120 practices or enhancements available across the nation. Now there's 223 in 2017. We won't have the full 223 available in Iowa, as we never had 120 available in Iowa last year in 2016. This is national numbers. In Iowa, we'll have a number of those that we don't offer because they're tied towards maybe rice production or for things for the Ogallala aquifer or longleaf pine, things that we just don't have in Iowa. So you won't see those on our list of enhancements that we're offering because there's no use in waste your time sorting through those trying to find ones that you would be interested in doing if they're not even something that would be eligible on your farm or you wouldn't ever be able to do anyway. So we'll have those removed before you see a list from us. There was 14 bundles of enhancements in 2016. Now there's up to 32 of them. I believe that I've already identified about 14 of those bundles that really wouldn't work in Iowa. A lot of those were, again, tied towards the Ogallala aquifers or longleaf pine, different initiatives that they were trying to do in different parts of the country. So those we wouldn't be offering in Iowa. And then we also had only 35 practices eligible in 2016. Now there's 77 across the state. There's very few of those that wouldn't be offered in Iowa. Maybe 5 or 6 of them that were practices that we don't even have in Iowa. So we'll be up around that 70 number anyway, or so on the practices eligible. Okay, the CSP payments. As I mentioned before, the payments are going to be a little bit different in the past. What is the same is in the past we had existing annual payments, and we're still going to pay for the existing activities you've got on your farm. So that part's going to be the same, but how we arrive at that payment, what you see in your contract is going to be different. The additional activity payments for those enhancements and practices and bundles you decide to do will also show up different on your contract, but we're paying for additional activities just like we did in the past. It's just going to be a lot more obvious what you're getting paid for. And we have always had a supplemental payment, which is for resource conserving crop rotation. And basically that's taking a rotation and adding additional hay in rotation or something that's a resource conserving crop. Hay is an easy example. But if you're adding an extra crop into the rotation that's resource conserving, you can get a supplemental payment for doing that type of activity. And those are all going to be listed under as enhancements that are associated with the conservation crop rotation practice. So it'll be pretty easy to identify which ones of those out of the 300 or 223 was it number. I even lost that number in my mind right now. But it'll be easy to find those because they're associated with the crop rotation practice. So the payment calculation for those have changed, and I'll just go into a little detail on that. First of all, the number of resource concerns that are met at the time of application will help to determine the amount of payment that you receive for your existing activities. So on each land use, we receive $350 for each resource concern treated. So if you have on the cropland land use 3 resource concerns that are treated at the time of application, you get 350 times 3 be $1,050 for each of those resource concerns treated. If you also have 3 resource concerns treated on your pasture land, you'd receive another $1,050 for that number of resource concerns treated at the time of application. You can receive the same thing on your associated ag land and the same thing on your farmstead. If you had 5 resource concerns treated on one of those, you'd get the 350 times 5 for that land use. So in addition to that, there's a land use payment rate. And so you just get a per acre payment for your existing activities to maintain those activities. On cropland, it's $7.50 per acre. We also pay $7.50 acres if you have pasture land that is considered what we call pastured cropland. What that means is this is pasture land is really good enough that it could be cropped. And so it's like an incentive for you to maintain that in pasture instead of tearing it up and crop it. We're going to go ahead and pay you the same rate we would pay it as if it was cropland. To be eligible as pastured cropland, it has to be greater than 50% of the land in that pasture has to be considered prime farmland. So that's a calculation that we'll run as we're doing the evaluation process on your application. It'll still be considered pasture in your contract. You just receive a higher payment rate on your existing payment for the land use rate. The pasture payment rates are $3 per acre. If you have non-industrial private forest land, forest contracts, those pay 50 cents per acre. We didn't do very many of those in the last few years, but if you do have forest land in your contract, it is a separate contract for the forest land. So you can apply for that under a separate contract, but it does not go in as the same contract with the rest of your land. So if you do have an interest in including that, make sure you sign up for that at the same time as you sign your original contract. You have to sign a separate application for each of those. So we don't want to come back after them to sign up here and say, oh yeah, I want my forest land in too. You want to make sure you remember to do that. The farmstead pays $7.50 per acre, similar to the cropland. Of course, that's over a lot less acres. The farmstead isn't very many acres. And the associated ag land pays 50 cents per acre, similar to the forest land. And some of these sites, the associated ag land can add up to quite a few acres. Okay, that's the two parts of the existing activity payments. And the other part of the payment is your new activities. So as you're doing enhancements or new practices or new bundles, it's pretty straightforward. You get a payment on the amount of units. So if you have acres, or it could be in feet, whatever the practice or enhancement is, it's typically a lot of these are done by the acre. You'll have a payment rate per acre. So if you're doing cover crops, and I'm just going to throw a number out there, it may or may not be close to correct. It may pay $10 per acre to do the cover crop, or something like no-till might pay on a per acre amount for doing that. So it's pretty straightforward. You're going to see that enhancement or that practice listed on your contract and how many dollars per acre you're getting paid to do it. So it's a lot easier than just saying that we're getting paid this much. We're getting paid for new activity points. You're going to see clearly what you're getting paid for. And then the supplemental payment is available to participant who also adopts the resource conserving crop rotation, as I mentioned before. That'll be a payment per acre also, similar to most of the other enhancements. But it'll be a separate line item on your contract for doing that. Okay. I'm going to move in next to talk about our ranking process just a little bit. The ranking process includes a total of 1,000 points in the ranking. Of that, the ranking is broken into 4 different parts. There's national ranking questions that are equal to half the points, so they're 500 points. There's state ranking questions that are equal to 300 points, so 30% of it. Then there's local ranking questions that are equal to 15% of 150 points, and then we have the fourth part of this is an efficiency score. What the efficiency score, which is worth 50 points, looks at is the conservation practice physical effects, which is a number that says that for that resource concern, let's say that resource concern might be a sheet and reel erosion resource concern, there's a number between 0 and 5 that says this does, if it's 5, if it does a very good job at treating sheet and reel erosion. If it's a 1, it does a little bit to help treat sheet and reel erosion, but not very much. So the higher conservation practice physical effect score, the higher this one will rate towards the efficiency score. It also looks at the cost of the practice. So if it's a very expensive cost to do, it's going to receive, a lower rating based upon the higher cost to do. So if you can get a high efficiency score, would be a site that does a very good job of treating a resource concern, but doesn't really cost a lot. Those are going to have the most shot at getting that 50 points. As you can see, the efficiency isn't a lot of the points, but it can be a good tiebreaker sometimes. Okay, as I talked a little bit earlier about some of the things that are included in the ranking, basically the things we're going to look at are the number of resource concerns that are treated at the time of application. So when the more resource concerns treated at the time of application, the higher it's going to rank. And then we'll look at the number of resource concerns that are treated by the end of the contract. So if you're applying additional activities that treat more resource concerns, it's going to rank higher. And then the number of resource concerns with new activities planned on them. Actually, I think I should say number of land uses with new activities. Oh no, it's the number of resource concerns. Sorry. So if we have new activities planned on 5 of the resource concerns, that's going to rank higher than one that has new activities planned on just 2 of them. In some of those cases, what's different between that one and the one above is that we can have a resource concern that was planned or was treated originally, but we can still plan activities to take to a higher level and still get additional points here. So that's how that's a little bit different than the point above there. And we're also going to be looking at the amount of expiring CRP that's maintained as cropland, that's maintained as permanent cover as it's being converted over to cropland. So if you're able to keep that seeded down and put it to pasture or put it into hay, that's going to rank a lot higher versus one that tears it up and puts it all crop. And there's a break in that, like if you're doing 75% or above, you're going to receive more points versus somebody that goes from 50 to 75%. And then one that's 25 to 50% receives less points yet. I think if you go below 25% that's maintained as permanent cover, that you don't get any points anymore. Additional things in the ranking, it looks at the percent of land that has new activities. As I mentioned, you can choose to do the activity on one field one year, move it to another field the next year. But if you do it on the entire operation, all years of the contract, it's going to rank a lot higher versus one that does it in just a small part of the operation. So the more new activities you do, the more the land it's covered on, the higher it's going to rank. There's special extra points in there if you're adopting habitat or practices that benefit wildlife habitat for T&E species. There's also special points in there if you're doing things that improve soil quality. And as I mentioned earlier, there's higher ranking for targeted resource concerns versus non-targeted resource concerns. That doesn't affect the eligibility, but it does affect the chances you'll get in because you'll have a higher ranking. There's special points in the local ranking criteria for installing cover crops. And we also have, if it's located in a local priority watershed, many of the counties have local priority watersheds that were identified for EQIP in the past. And I think from what I understand, a lot of them will use those priority watersheds that are already identified as priority for the local community. So they'll probably use those same watersheds as areas for the CSP ranking. In summary, the NRCS has made some improvements to try to strengthen the CSP program. The reinvention includes several changes and include incorporation of additional flexibilities. We're going to use new tools that help provide transparency in the valuation and ranking process, changes to the payment rate calculations for existing activities and additional payments or additional activities. I think that's going to make it a lot easier to see what's in your contract that you need to be doing. And I'm not sure that we're done making some of these changes yet. Additional improvements may continue as NRCS evaluates the results from the 2017 signups. If we get to the end of this, one thing that I could see happening, if it comes out that our payments mean we're spending more than $18 per acre, which is by law the maximum we can go, the next year they're going to come back with lower payment rates. If it comes out that we're spending less than $18, they're going to increase the payment rate. So that'll be one of the things that they're going to evaluate. Of course, is they think they've got these payment rates set to where it's going to come out to meet the national average, but I think that's one of the things that easily could change if there's something else in the process that we can see additional ways to make improvements. We'll see those things change again for the next year. I think this is definitely an improvement, but that doesn't mean that we don't have additional improvements we can do.
All right, thank you, Dave. That was a great overview. And so I know he's got questions up here on the screen, but I'm going to go ahead and pull up Larrette's presentation, because if any of this was interesting to you, if you think it would fit your farm, then you'd want to go into your local NRCS office and talk to someone like Larrette, who's a district conservationist, about how to sign up. And so her and Jim are going to walk through the sign up process here, and we'll give them till about just after 8 o'clock, 8:10 or so, and then we'll leave about 20 minutes for questions. So if you have questions for Dave or for Larrette, we'll have time for that when they're done. So Larrette, let me pull up your presentation and then you can take it over. Thanks again, Dave.
Okay, while you're bringing that up. Yeah, I live west of Alta. Um, wean to finish hogs, so I have a fair amount of manure. Um, corn and beans, no till into the corn stalks, the beans, and work the ground once and plant corn. We're off the road start.
Larrette, are you there? I heard Jim just kind of give a brief overview of his farm, and then I haven't heard you. Are you still there? I don't know if it's just me, but I'm not hearing any audio from over there anymore.
Hey, you just moved the laptop. Can you hear us now?
Well, I can hear you a little bit. Maybe it sounds a little muffled. Maybe
Okay,
sound
I'm not really sure why because I
there
was
you go.
talking in the same spot Jim is. So,
Okay, yeah. Now you sound good.
okay, so you did get to hear Jim then, and then can you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, and you can control your slides with the arrows on that bottom left corner of the slide screen there. You know, on the screen with the actual slide on it. There's that bottom left corner with two arrows forwards and backwards, and you can, there you go, yep. So, Larrette, I don't know, it looks like your microphone's now on mute.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me again?
All right, yep, there we go.
Okay, so we're going to talk about whether or not CSP is right for the producer or not. To me, I don't think you have to put that much time and effort into this, but you'll put in a little bit of effort into the program initially for an interview process, and we tell people about 2 hours. And people laugh at us, but once they get in there, they like to talk about their farming operation and find out what more they can do for conservation. Then we'll go to the field and we'll field truth everything that was said. Then you'll sign your contract, and then the amount of time that you're going to put into it after you sign your contract depends on the items that you agreed to do. And then once a year, you'll come into the NRCS office and certify that what you agreed to do is what you did, and then we'll get the payment form ready, and then you would come in a second time and sign for your payment, and you usually get paid within 30 days. Also, the records need to be in writing because when we get audited or you get audited, we need to document that why you're getting paid for what you agreed to do. And like what Dave said, these are 5-year contracts, and you'll apply. You'll come in and you'll say that this is what you're already doing for existing activities, but by the end of this interview process, you'll agree to do at least one additional conservation activity. Oops, so we got to turn. Okay, so some of your options depends for your enhancement activities what you have to deal with. So if you have like crops, because most people have crop land, then they may agree to do conservation cover. They may agree to put on cover crops, have reduced tillage or no tillage, work with irrigation, or like with the herbicide programs, they can also, again, some of these practices overlap because you can have the cover crops, you can bring in conservation cover, or, if you need like a waterway or a field border, you can use those as activities. And the wildlife this time around, they're looking more at like the monarch butterfly habitat or like wildlife corridors that we can use. Okay, so then with the self-screening checklist that you can go onto the NRCS website and look at it ahead of time, or think about what forms do you need to bring in, and you can call your NRCS office and ask them. But usually when you come into an NRCS office, you're going to ask who usually works with CSP, because this is a very intense program, at least on our side. And so some offices, every employee knows the whole program inside and out, and some offices only one person knows. So when you come into the office, you're going to ask who deals with CSP and then get that person to help you. So back to the checklist, like what Dave said earlier, only the tenant can apply for CSP. And like he said, you can have people that farm 50-50, but FSA has a form called 156EZ, and whoever name is at the top of that is the only person that can sign up for CSP. So you might be brothers and you're 50-50. You could be mother-daughter and you could be 50-50. But for whatever reason that NRCS puts the one person at the top, we need to make sure that person's name stays there for the next 5 years so that nobody loses a CSP contract. The landowner will have to sign a control of land form saying that it's okay that the tenant has control of the land for 5 years, but it is not an official document. It's just the government's way of making sure that the landowner realizes there might be a government contract on their property. If you're going to go into CSP, you have to make sure that you're highly erodible compliant and that you're not, and that you're wetland compliant also. The adjusted gross income for most, you have to have an AGI of less than $900,000. So if you make more than $900,000, you're not eligible for this program. Okay, so for land eligibility, if you have private land, tribal land, you're eligible for this. All land in your operation has to have the control of land form from your landowner. If you can't get it, that's fine. We just don't put those acres into your contract. The applicant, elects whether or not, if he wants to include non-industrial private forest land. Up here in my 2 counties, that is something we don't have to worry about. Ineligible land would be land that's already in CRP, WRP, WRE, AC, EP, public land that's not, or public land, and then land that, to me, I just use the word sod busted, but land that's not been planted 4 out of the 6 years prior to February of 2014. Okay, so the stewardship threshold requirements, you have to have 2 of these land uses in your operation to be considered for a CSP contract. One is if you have a little bit of erosion, that's okay. I've seen some of these contracts get in with just a little bit. If you have a lot, that's probably something you need to work on before you come sit with your NRCS office CSP. You might want to come talk to us about how to minimize the erosion before you start your CSP contract. As long as you've got some residue out there, if you have a creek, a stream, or a water body like a pond, as long as there's a minimum 30-foot grass strip, you would be eligible for CSP. The nutrient requirements, you'd want to meet the ISU recommendations for your nitrogen for CSP. Areas on your farm are actively managed for wildlife habitat. We do look at that. And if you irrigate your cropland, is your application based on soil moisture monitoring and or evapotranspiration monitoring? Okay, if you have pasture land, it's the same thing that you must meet. I must be off a slide. Nope. Okay, so if you have pasture land, you must have to meet 2 of these land uses also in your operation. A little to none of the erosion. So if you have livestock trails or feeding areas that doesn't have much grass, we need to probably work on that, but you can still sign up for CSP. There is you have to have enough forage for your livestock. If you don't, we'll probably talk to you about supplementing, which you probably already are then, the food source. We'll have you manage the livestock so that they don't have complete access to the streams or the water sources. We'll also look at wildlife habitat for these pastures. And again, if you irrigate your pasture, we want to probably see if you're using soil moisture as your monitoring or evapotranspiration. Okay, so again, when you go to pick your office that you're going to go to, some people have land in more than 1 county, so where 51% of your acres lie, that is the county that you should probably go to. Some people get along better with other field offices than some offices, so you might be able to get the 2nd county then to work with you if you have a preference, but that is up to those NRCS offices, because rule of thumb is wherever 51% of your acres are, that is the office to go to. And again, I would just ask who in the office deals with CSP or feels more comfortable talking to you about it, and then you would fill out the application with them. Here's a map you can kind of see, and I bet you already know where your NRCS offices are. If not, we also have this map up on the Iowa NRCS website. Okay, so when you start out to get NRCS contract anymore, whether it's EQIP, CSP, you have to have a DUNS and a SAMS number. And I know that Dave's listening to this, and this is not the most professional thing, but this is a very difficult task that anybody from NRCS can ask you to do. So you need to allow about half a day, 40 minutes to half a day to fill out the SAMS number. But first you will get a DUNS number, and you have to do that. Well, most people do that on the computer, but there is a 1-800 number that's on the application form that you can call if you don't have a computer. And some people, it takes like 30 seconds to 5 days to get that DUNS number. After you have the DUNS number, I believe now they tell you to wait another 5 days, and then you can go in and get the DUNS number. And when you come in, we'll give you a 1-800 help number, because even with that help number, I understand it's a minimum of 40 minutes to with the questions that they ask you and to go through the computer process. So with Jim, we're going to get him involved into this conversation. So we're both going to try to hover over the speaker. So if it's not working, please let us know. But here is a picture of Jim's farm. Jim, do you want to talk a little bit about your farm before we get going?
Yeah, Larrette and Jim, I don't know what happened there, but when you passed it over to Jim, we haven't heard anything.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go. Yep.
Okay. I was just kind of looking at this picture and saying the amount of terraces on this farm is a lot, but it's really corrected all the problems as far as erosion and cuts over the years. It was a process that started in the late 70s, early 80s, and gradually we've added on. And I haven't probably done anything since 98. So what I've done on this farm is it's pretty well complete now, and now it's basically maintenance. In the middle of the farm, there's a lane, and there's 4 little white marks. Those are windmills. So that's kind of the dividing line between where the ground slopes to the south and where the ground slopes to the north. And so that lane is basically access to get to the windmills.
Okay, so the way our laptop is set up and to talk into it, we're going to try to both talk on top of each other, but we'll go through and start the application itself. So if you'll wait just a moment, I'll get this arrow to show you where we're going. Okay, so when Jim walks in the door, we'll have him sign up as an individual. So we'll write his name in here. Then we'll do his address, and if he has email, that's kind of handy, as long as he uses his email. Then also anymore, we ask people for their cell phone numbers, because even if you're up at Badlands or something, Black Hills, we can talk to you almost any time and get a hold of you if you're out doing chores. The legal description, each office does this different, but I usually fill this in after the gentleman or the producer leaves. Like Dave said earlier, you have to have records with FSA first before you can sign up. So if you don't have your records, you'll go talk to FSA. But for most part, most producers do have records with FSA. You're going to sign up for CSP, and then in this case, we said Jim was signing up as an individual, so he's not going to have to worry about the DUNS and the SAMS number. But if you were going to sign up as the entity, a partnership, or a trust, or part of an estate, he would have to apply for the DUNS and the SAMS number. And then you can see down here in number 4 that this is where, well, there used to be an address here on the internet to go to, but we also have a separate packet that we hand out at the time when you come in to go get the DUNS and the SAMS number. Because we're going to take your application the day you come in and say, yep, this is what I want to do, but we cannot process your application until the SAMS number shows up on the computer. So, or you come in first to tell us that it's there. So it's very pertinent that once you say, yes, you want to do this, that you go get the DUNS and SAMS number so that you don't lose out on a ranking period for CSP. So like in Jim's case, he said that he had hogs, corn, and beans. So we're going to sign him up because we're going to pay for the crop production in this case. And so then we just type in the corn and beans here. Okay, so then the land is offered that he has is all private land. He's not farming any DNR land or any tribal land. He said that he owned this ground, so we'll ask him to get a deed from the courthouse because it usually costs us money, so then we ask the producer to go, and sometimes it costs at the courthouse for him and sometimes it doesn't. If he previously had ground with CRP on it, then we just walk over to FSA and get that copy of the deed from there so it doesn't cost anybody anything. Then number 8 is the land offered in this application enrolled in any other conservation program. So on this farm, no, there's not. But if he was offering a piece of ground that had CRP or EQIP on it, we would write yes here. Then number 9 is going to be, it's going to ask if he belongs to any of these categories. A limited resource producer in DV County is a family of 4 that makes less than $25,000. And there was one more part to it. I think net income over the last 2 years or something had to be less than $173,000. A beginning farmer would be anybody that's been farming for 10 years or less. Socially disadvantaged would be his call to tell us. And if he was a veteran, he would also speak at this time to say if he was. But most producers don't fit into any of these categories, at least in my 2 counties, so we usually put not applicable. Number 10 is any of the land offered for enrollment under this application. So does he have organic farm acres, or is he transitioning to organic, or does he have ground that's exempt from organic certification? But in this case, I've seen Jim farm. He's going to write not applicable. Okay, so then with the appendix, when that comes back to the end, there's like 18 pages that goes to an application. And so to simplify, what the 18 pages say is we can't have you sign the contract or pay out if you start any practices before you have a contract. And if for some reason you see that you're not going to be able to hold your part up of the agreement of the contract, I would like it if you would come into me or any NRCS office and see what we can do to try to save the contract, because usually if the contract is voluntarily why it's given up, there will be a penalty. But if there's involuntary, then usually NRCS will work with you. And it does say, well, it used to say subject to the availability of funds multiple times, but when I actually read the appendix for this tonight, I see it's only written into the appendix once, subject to the availability of funds. When the producer signs the contract, Congress has not even released the money yet. So we're at the mercy of Congress to release the money by the time we go to pay you, usually in January or December. Okay, so creating the contract. When we go to create this, we're going to use the CATE tool, or the Conservation Activity Evaluation tool, to evaluate the applications on stewardship threshold requirements. The second thing we're going to look at is the AERT, the Application Evaluation Ranking tool, and we'll run the ranking through this tool to see how high the producer ranks out. And then part of the stewardship plan will have to be included in the conservation activities. the producer will adopt through the CSP contract. And like Dave said, in his part, these contracts are 5 years, and they're going to be reviewed annually. And usually, there's a certain percent that gets reviewed in the field every year in every county, and almost every year, your folder will get reviewed here in the office, and most of the time, producers don't even realize it. Also, practices are implemented based on what the producer agrees to do in the contract. So when he's signing his contract, he knows what is in there. If he signed up for the fall stock test, he knows then that he'll have to take 20 samples for 20 acres to each year that he has corn out there. And then also, some people have drift reducing nozzles, lower pressure, lower boom height, and adjuvants. The guy's going to know that he's got that stuff on his equipment, and when he's using it, spraying his herbicides or fungicides or whatever he's got. So the person knows how much time he's going to put into this, and also when he signs his contract, he knows what he's getting paid. So he can decide if it's worth his time or not for the amount of money that he's going to receive. And if for some reason the producer agreed to do a certain practice, but whether it was an act of God or if for some reason the guy just forgot, sometimes things happen. And so NRCS will do an annual contract review, document, oops, there was an accident, and the producer said he will never ever let this happen again. And so then we just move on because we do realize things happen. Okay, so payments are made annually. Most of the time, we're going to call you up. Well, we send letters, call you like the 1st of November and say, you need to come in and certify what you agreed upon is what you actually did. And then most of the time, that's what happens. But sometimes people enter ground into CRP or, some reason the landlord said, oops, I'm going to let your neighbor over here farm my ground instead. And so then we would modify those acres out of the contract, and that was involuntary. So then there would be no penalty to the producer. And so once we know that, and we need to know that kind of stuff within 60 days from when you put it in so that you're not penalized. But otherwise, if they're involuntary and you come talk to us, then there will not be any penalties. Okay, so the documentation for the practice, well, it depends. It depends what you agreed upon, what we're going to need. So if you signed up for conservation crop rotation, most people have corn beans, so they're probably not going to get a payment for that. But if they go ahead and put a perennial seeding into their crop rotation, then, they would document that this year I seeded my oats and alfalfa, and or else they would document that, yes, for the fall stock test, I have my results back and I can provide them when asked for it. Like in this example with the monarch butterfly enhancement, here they had to have conservation cover. So they provided a map, or we'll get them a map, and then they'll write on there where they seeded down for the cover and talk about what kind of, they'll write down what kind of habitat areas that they're providing. There will be provided a seeding mix, or in this case, a planting mix of what percent is needed in the seed mix for the species and the rates. And they'll document that that's what they use by providing receipts and seed tags. List of management or maintenance activities that are carried out to manage the habitat areas. So sometimes, when it's just first seeded, those first 2 or 3 years, they're going to have to mow it to keep the forbs and the grasses in line and the weeds out. So those would be the activities. How many times did they mow it? Okay, so I'm good with my part. If you want to take over with questions, Jim and I and Dave, I think we're ready.
Yeah, thank you very much, Larrette. That was a lot of great information packed into a short amount of time, so I'm sure some of these folks have some questions for you, but we'll see. Go ahead and use the chat box if you do have questions for either Larrette or Dave or Jim. Type it in there, and we've got them for a little bit longer if you have anything to ask them.
This is Dave. I just wanted to mention, as Larrette was going through the application form, and she was on the part about the Duns and Sam, and it didn't have the link in there. I did go in and look at the application that is online, and there is a link to both the Dun site and the Sam site. So the application does provide those links. It just wasn't on the slideshow.
Okay, and I have a question about that, Larrette. When you were going through that, it initially sounded like everybody needs to do that, but then during the sign up sheet, when you had to check whether you're signing up as an individual or as a corporation, it looked like maybe it was only required for the corporation. Can you clarify that again? Does everybody need to do that, or is that just for those who are not signing up as an individual?
Only the partnership, trust, and estates have to use the DUNS and the SAMS number.
In corporations.
And the corporations, yep.
Anybody that's using a tax ID instead of a social security number would have to do that.
So, Jim, can I ask you then, is your farm set up under you as an individual, or are you in a corporation?
My farm is set up as a trust through my father and mother.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up this slide again to see where we are. Okay, then it was initial CSP application. Okay, so like if you were signing up, then it would be under that entity, and so you have a tax number for that. Do you already have your Duns and Sam's number for any other reason, or would you need to go through that process if you were to sign up right now?
No, I would have to go through that process.
Okay, yeah, I'm just curious. I'm just curious if someone who operates under a trust like you or any of these other options, is there another reason that they might already have gone through that? I'm not really sure if those numbers are used for other purposes, I guess. Maybe somebody already has those. I don't know. Does that happen?
Once in a while, you'll find somebody that already has a DUNS and a SAMS number for previous experiences, but I haven't quite got it figured out why.
Typically, we don't have many people that we work with that already have a DUNS or SAM registration unless they've had a prior contract with us for EQIP or CSP. There aren't many other activities that they're doing out there with federal government contracting that they would have to have that for. The Farm Services Agency does not require the DUNS and SAM at this time, so they wouldn't have it for working with them.
Okay. And speaking of the Farm Services Agency, one of the screening requirements was to go in there to make sure you have you're registered with them, and they're almost always in the same physical building as the NRCS office. Is that right?
That's true. I think there's 3 counties in the state that we would have an office in that the Farm Services Agency no longer has an office. In those cases, I think they're all 3 in southern Iowa. In those cases, they would have to go to the neighboring county that they typically go to do their work with the Farm Services Agency.
Okay, and I guess while we're talking about that, getting the operator of record in the farm FSA record system, is that something that would be required for like EQIP money, or is that just for CSP?
Yeah, that'd be required.
Yes. Yes, we would also need it for EQIP to have the DUNS and the SAMS number and the farm records.
Okay, all that then would be same kind of requirement regardless of whether it's EQIP or CSP program.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of surprised there's no questions coming up here in the chat box. I guess that means you guys were real thorough.
We'll take it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they know where to go for questions. There's an NRCS office in every county, so if folks do have follow-up questions, you're welcome to reach out to me here at Practical Farmers, and I can help connect you with the right person if I don't know. Otherwise, visit your NRCS office. And I guess if I don't see any questions coming up in the chat box, then we can just kind of go ahead and wrap this up. So big thanks to Dave for his presentation from Des Moines tonight, and a big thanks to Larrette and Jim for up in Cherokee County. So thanks for everybody for putting time into this. This was real helpful for me, at least wrapping my head around the CSP program. I hope other folks found it useful too.
Thanks for inviting us to share.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have a survey here for any attendees that have an extra minute just to go quick through this, evaluate this Farminar, and provide some feedback on what other topics you'd like to see in the future. So I just pulled that up, if you don't mind taking that real quick. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.